WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Beth Leonard of Delafield is the Democratic candidate for the 97th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Beth Leonard, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you very much.
What's your campaign's key message? Why are you running?
Well, I have several points, but I would say the main reason I'm running is I want to encourage more people to get involved in public service. And in the area I live in, usually there aren't two candidates on the ballot, and I think it's really important and really exciting that maybe due to the redistricting, but I think almost every assembly district now actually has a race going with two people instead of just one. So I think that's primarily what initially brought me into it, but the more I learn about the issues and everything, I'm certainly have a lot of, as you will be asking me about, a lot of topics that are important to me.
So if you're elected, what would be a priority for a bill you would introduce?
I would want to look at education funding, and I'm sure there's been committees and all kinds of advisory boards that have looked at that. I'd like to see what the problems are with this current funding formula and look at correcting those problems and supplementing some of that with additional funding for education. And I think we need to look at revenue sources. So hand in hand with that, which may seem kind of ironic, I would see trying to beef up funding for education and looking for a new revenue source as well. And in my case, I think that we should legalize recreational marijuana because it's legal all around us and we are losing all of that revenue. And morally, I don't see an issue with that. And I think that there's a reason why it hasn't been done in Wisconsin, and I don't think it has to do with people's attitudes as much as some other influences.
So if you're elected, you're entering during a biennial budget year, and the state is projected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of the surplus funding?
I would say the top two priorities, again, would be educational funding and specifically really looking at special education. I spent about a dozen years working as an administrator in a large urban school district, and special ed in the cases of some of those larger districts can make up to 30% of the student body. It's not as high throughout the state, but it is a part of our educational system that's growing quite a bit and needs resources to deal with. It is so different to educate a special education student as opposed to one who is not, in terms of the level of support system you need and the personnel you need. And so districts with a high proportion of them are really not on an even playing field.
So that's one priority. Is there another one for surplus funding?
I would look at any way to give it back to taxpayers. And that could be either through direct rebates, or it could be by providing incentive programs to achieve one goal of the state by incentivizing citizens with a rebate of some sort or that revenue to get them to modify their behavior. For instance, give more incentives on people who install solar systems or buy electric cars or do something to modify their own environment to make it more friendly for the rest of the community.
Is any type of specific tax cut or tax reform part of your platform?
I don't have a specific item of reform other than looking at that funding, the state funding formula. Otherwise, it'd be interesting to know where did the surplus come from, and do we need to modify our budgetary process? It may be mostly due to COVID money, I'm not sure, but I think we need to look at exactly how our budget works in terms of input and outflow.
So you mentioned education as a high priority for you. What do you think is working well in K-12 education and what really needs to change?
Well, I think what works well in K-12 education is going to the teacher level and the classroom level, and school districts who have modified, for instance, class sizes. I mean, I think most states have had initiatives where, in Indiana it was called prime time, where you would get funding so you could keep your class sizes at a certain level. My experience, and from what I heard from both administrators and teachers, is that was a huge difference for them to have their class sizes go down. So I think that would be an example of
a priority.
What
about in higher education, the state system of 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, technical colleges? What does the future of that system look like to you, and what should the legislature focus on?
Well, I know that enrollment decline has been an issue, and we all have to deal with that. And we want to have geographic parity in the state, too, in terms of how those 2-year campuses are distributed, and where, of course, we have the 2 prime 4-year campuses, but or our branches, I should say, not 2-year campuses. But I think that in terms of the priority there are so many opportunities with business and with job training and those types of campuses. That we have many smaller campuses, many that are being closed. But if we could repurpose them and perhaps working with private and public partnership, look at turning them into something other than just a school campus. Get some other uses in that facility. Those are huge facilities we're giving up or closing, and I think they could be repurposed and also used for job training.
Do you support full funding for the Universities of Wisconsin system?
I know our funding has dropped immensely. I don't want to quote statistics, but I don't know, but they were pretty dramatic when I heard them. And I do support as full funding as much as we can, and I also support that to maintain enrollment of residents in these systems. Our 2-year colleges, some which are closing, were an important stepping stone to that, because a student could go there for 2 years, pay that lower tuition, and then after 2 years go to Madison. Because unfortunately we have a large segment of our students that don't even qualify to go to Madison. And I don't know what the in-state population is there, but I think that we need to create those opportunities for people to move on then to the 4-year system if they want to.
What do you consider to be the state's largest workforce development challenge, and what's the solution you support?
Workforce development, well, number one, it's people. We have to make sure we have people that stay here after they get out of their training programs or their 4-year colleges or whatever educational vehicle they use. So it's trying to retain the people, the younger people that come out of the systems, and get them working in our area. I think that for workforce development, again, I see it as a public-private partnership, because in order to attract employers and in order to retain our employers, we have to have a workforce that's well-trained, and programs that work with a specific industry or group of industries as well in terms of developing curriculum at the schools. It's a perfect model for bringing people from being a student to being an employee.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Absolutely. I would see that as using the word requirement, I would somewhat modify that, because I can imagine there might be certain industries or technologies when we are developing the infrastructure where we may need specialized help that we haven't developed yet in-house or in-state. But for the most part and vast majority, I would hope that we would only hire Wisconsin residents first, or fill the positions first with them.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
I was not aware of this issue until I heard about it through my campaigning, But I do believe we should use a classification system that's used across the board and in a fair system. So if you're going to have especially public projects being bid on, you do not have an even playing field if one bidder is not using proper classification and is underpaying and not providing any benefits, and the others are. You obviously, how do you go with the low bid? So I think that they just have to have a standard. Everybody that applies or bids on public projects has to meet that standard. And it's very similar to back in the 80s when we had CDBG money or federal money, and every contractor had to pay prevailing wages. So that's something that's always been tied to public money and public projects.
Moving on to housing. Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control or building more rentals or some other solution?
I think it would have to be a hybrid, but rent controls I feel pretty uncertain about, because everything is so market driven, and I don't know how up to date they could be as our market changes and as the economy changes. So I do believe, though, that we need to provide more better rental housing and permanent housing for our residents, and I've heard that there's massive shortages that have been projected. However, I think that we need to look more at our existing inventory of buildings and facilities, and we have closed buildings in terms of schools get closed in lots of areas. There's office and retail space that is plentiful because of COVID and because we've now changed the way we do business. I would like to see repurposing as being the number one priority to look at, because there you already have your roads, you have your transportation, you have your support services. So the idea of building houses out in the vacant cornfield, and it exists as an island, and then you still have to worry about how to tie it into the rest of the community. I'm not as much for that as I am for dealing with what facilities you have in your community and how you can better use them.
And the state providing some incentive for that.
And the state could incentivize that, yes.
Moving on to healthcare. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Well, I think I would, number one, expand Medicaid funding. I've looked through this and looked at the numbers, and we could save, as they say, $1.7 billion. And I believe that is not something that some people call expanding welfare. I don't consider medical care as welfare. To me, it's more of a cash handout. And even then, I just don't see how healthcare and welfare are two things that are the same thing. So I believe that expanding it is important for not only the constituents, but it helps us raise our reimbursements up to 90%. So we save a bunch of money. Our taxpayers, you and I save a lot of money if we do that. So I do not see a downside to that. Hospitals, I'm not as familiar with their forms of ownership, but I do know in other parts of the country, when you start having private hospitals getting owned by venture capitalists, they pretty much just bleed the system and then the hospital goes under. And I've heard those stories too.
What about mental health care? It's a growing concern for many Wisconsinites and for state and county budgets. What are you hearing about in your district on that issue, and what would you propose to do about it?
Well, it's important, and it's a nonpartisan issue because it's been used and talked about on both sides of the table in terms of gun violence and mass shootings and how it's all about the mental health. And I think we need to, as I talked about expanding educational funding, we need to increase our counseling services within our K-12 system. And that you have to start that early, and you have to make it available. You have to take the stigma out of it. So I really believe the schools and the providing or funding of mental health professionals for that could help the whole problem systemically. And then I also believe that we should provide incentives for certain academic programs that are in careers that we need people in. And mental health is one where we need people to be going into that as a field.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
I feel we should just go back to the Roe versus Wade restrictions. In my mind, I think it is a personal health issue with women, and the fact that we've seen these nightmares of women not being serviced by hospitals when they're going through a miscarriage or a stillborn or whatever that happens to be, it's outrageous. So I really feel like we need to go back to the way it had been.
Transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is that these are addressed, and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of our aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Well, in my district, it's primarily roads. I know that there are some bus systems out in Waukesha County for the city of Waukesha, which is not in my district, but it's all roads. And it's important that we maintain them, and I think it's one of the things that made Wisconsin better than some of our Midwestern neighbors is I always felt we had good roads. I grew up here, and I always noticed that, and people always commented to me from out of state about it. So I think we need to continue maintaining the roads the way they are, but I do think we need to look at, in terms of between population centers, I would love to see us with some high-speed rail and some other options for people, ride-share options.
The environment. PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Absolutely. My district is part of what they call lake country, so we have lots of surface water resources, but we also really depend greatly on our groundwater. I believe most people in the district and in that area of the county are on private wells. So it's imperative that we continue to monitor the quality. I think enforcement is the key issue with our state enforcers like the DNR in terms of monitoring, testing, and then looking at the issue as a whole to see how much has it impacted our surface and groundwater.
Final two questions. How would you describe your leading differences between you and your opponent?
We actually have a lot of similarities, believe it or not. And so, we same school district, 2 boys, same age approximately, same area we live in. But I think the main difference is that things or value judgments such as expanding Medicaid. I went to a forum in Jefferson County with my opponent, and she classified that as expanding welfare. And I do feel that there is an attitude like that about Medicaid and Medicare, and I would like to see that not be a belief system that causes us to lose $1.7 billion a year.
Final question. Let's say you're elected this fall and you get a magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue that brings all parties, all people together. What is that one issue?
I would say it is money in politics. Now, again, I don't think Wisconsin is necessarily a bad example because we do have limits on donations. But I do feel like we really need to get more people involved in running for office. And there are a lot of hurdles and barriers you have to go through to do that. And the more that we could get younger people involved, millennials involved, and all the other generations, the better I think our government will be. And I think because money and politics have gotten so intertwined, people have a very negative view of politics, even at the local and state level. So I really think we have to get people into it so then they won't have that attitude as much as they'll feel empowered and that they actually are making a difference as opposed to some of the attitudes I'm hearing from people that are fed up with it.
Well, thank you, Beth Leonard of Delafield, the Democratic candidate for the 97th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. And Beth Leonard, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you for the opportunity.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.